So, what do we, who wants to start? You know, where do we want to go? I guess we're just anywhere. As an introduction, just let me say that there are no questions that are off the table. Please feel free to say anything, ask anything you want to ask. Any question asked that's an honest question, it's because you want to know, then it's okay. So don't worry about, well, that's not a nice question, or maybe that's, wouldn't be polite, or maybe just let all that go. Just ask if it's honest and it's a question you want to know, then just spit it out and we'll, if I can't answer it, I'll tell you I can't answer it. So don't feel constrained about, sometimes people feel like they have to be polite. It wouldn't be a polite thing to say. Do you really know what you're talking about? How do you know? That you're not just imagining all of this. That'd be impolite to ask that. Well, if that's your question, then ask it. So don't feel constrained in any way to politeness. Now, we don't want any rudeness either. But we don't have to worry about what you ask, or how you ask it. Just feel free.
So what's the bid on UFOs?
All right, what was that?
UFOs, are they just an interpretation of data that people are not seeing a saucer, or all the reports, that there's so many reports? Is it just the interpretation of data, or is it something that they believe in UFOs, so that's what they experience, that's what they are think they're experiencing, when they're really experiencing possibly a connection with consciousness from a realm out of the distance, in this rule set?
Well, everything is an interpretation of data. Okay, so that's everything. Whether it's UFOs or whether it's anything, it's all an interpretation from data. Now, how we interpret the data has to do with our beliefs and our experience and what we know. So if you get data and it's it's something communicating with you, you will tend to interpret that as a being. Okay, because that's what it is. We don't talk with rocks. So when something interacts with us, it's a being. So that's one thing. If you see something interacts with you, then if you have beliefs that, well, if it interacts with me, it's a being. If it's a being, it's physical. If it's physical, it comes from somewhere in the universe. And if it doesn't come from this planet, then it's an extraterrestrial. All that kind of things are logic. And if it's an extraterrestrial, then maybe how did it get here? And perhaps then you'll also see the saucer, or the rocket ship, or something else, because that's part of filling in your interpretation of what it is you're seeing.
Okay, what about the crop circles, the ones that aren't obviously fake? There are some things that people can, a bunch of people
don't know.
Big pictures of it.
Right. I don't know about crop circles.
Don't
know about crop circles, but we have this idea about reality being physical. Therefore, if there's a crop circle, then somehow it had to have been made. Right? So it couldn't just happen, because things just don't happen. That's not an objective reality. In an objective reality, things just don't occur one morning because they're there. They have to have a reason. They have to have a cause. So somebody had to go out and mow it, or make, somehow,
Like how did it get there?
How did it get there? Yeah. And we can only imagine it got there through some physical means, because in our minds, only physical means are the only way that anything can happen. So if we do that, then something had to do it, right? Well, if something had to do it, and it happened in the middle of the night, and it covers 20 acres, and it's this very intricate pattern, how could a bunch of people have gone out there with little size, or drive a tractor around or something in the middle of the night and nobody noticed over 10 acres of ground? Then it tends to be impossible. Well, we can't imagine physically how that could have happened. So then if we can't imagine physically how it can happen, then what's the next thing? Well, it must be aliens, So we come to the next logical thing that fits into our has to be physical belief system. So now we have aliens that had to do it, because we can't imagine how non-aliens could have done it.
What if it was just energy, or what if it was just a consensus hallucination I mean, not more than this is anyway.
No, this whole reality is a consensus hallucination.
That's what I said.
So you have to think, I don't know where the crop circles come from, but it is not that implausible to me that today there's no crop circle, 30 seconds later there is one.
Okay, could it
1
be-
second later there is one. It just occurs. You see, you don't know. So you get to a point where you say, well, I don't know where it comes from. There's no need then to take your beliefs in a physical reality and end up having aliens do it. It just happens and we don't know.
I think
So that's the living with uncertainty. And you hear me say that a lot. You have to learn to live gracefully with uncertainty. So you get to a point, I don't know. Now you can say, well, okay, what are the possibilities? Aliens did it, and then it's like, well, why do aliens do it? Well, then you have to figure out some reason why that. Or you might, people snuck out there and did it with, machines that were invented by Star Wars, to energy beams from space, and they're trying to do this just to drive us nuts, or whatever. You can come up with all kinds of rationale, but I think it's better just to stop short of all those rationales and just say, I don't know. Okay? It isn't a phenomena. It's obviously been seen. The photographs have taken of it. It wasn't there last night. It's there in the morning. That's hard to do if you think it's a bunch of pranksters. And then it's just, well, I don't know. But there isn't any reason why it couldn't just appear, because our reality's like that. This is not an objective reality. Things like that can happen. And usually they have a purpose. And typically the purpose is to open people's minds so that you kind of get to this unknown, and reality is bigger than you think, because now something impossible has happened. And how is it possible that something impossible happens? Well, now you have a logical problem there. And the only solution to that is, well, there's things that are beyond what we think. We think we know this physical matter reality, and guess what? That's not all there is to it. There's something bigger going on here. Otherwise, it couldn't happen overnight. And it's the same with paranormal experiences. I had a friend, Lyle. He was one of the very early people that I sent pieces of manuscript out. And Lyle was very interested in free will, and he was very interested in paranormal things, and he was an engineer, Canadian engineer. And his story was that he thought all of this stuff was a bunch of bunk thought up by people who, were emotionally or mentally challenged in some way. They made this stuff up for whatever their own personal reasons were. And then one night he had a dream, and in this dream, it really was more of an out-of-body experience. But in this dream, he suddenly was in an airplane. And Lyle, being an engineer, knew a lot about airplanes. So he knew that this was he could tell you the model and the type of the airplane. And he was in the aisle, and he looked around, and he saw all these people, and all of them were in black and white, except for one little girl who was in color. And he said it was in perfect detail, just like being there. He could tell what they were wearing, just every detail about them. And then the next day, there was an airplane crash, this exact same model and type of airplane. Survivor, one little girl. So that just blew his mind, of course. And he got as much data as he could about it, and every piece of data he could find out fit exactly, the number of people, the whatever. He knew that was it. So that just changed his whole world. And why did he have that experience?
To change his world.
To change his whole world. So why do we have crop circles? I think my interpretation would be, I don't know, but I think it's of the same sort of thing. It's just an eye-opener. It's just a thing that helps people see a larger reality. And that's the only point for it. And how does it actually physically get there? Well, I think that's the wrong question. You see, we don't live in that kind of reality. It's there. It just occurs. Now, maybe, it could be aliens out there with their little, energy beam, making pretty patterns in the crops. But That's
Maybe
just
the-
a
maybe the
conjecture.
consciousness system
Yeah,
saying,
it's just part of the conscious system saying, well, what are we going to do today to help wake the people up? Oh, I know. How about a pretty design out here in the crop circle, and we'll make it go over 20 acres.
It's got to be easier ways than to, it's like we're spoofing ourselves. I mean, what are we going to, as a mass consciousness, we're kind of saying, all right, we'll do this behind our own backs, and let's freak with ourselves, and we'll do this.
There's all sorts of things. It could be just like you're saying, an expression of our own sense of the unknown that occurs. But in general, we think of this reality being a lot more solid and objective as it is, and that's what drives us nuts about these things, because we keep looking for the objective solution. How did that get there? And then we invent objective things, little people from outer space, to do it. It all has to stay physical, and then there is no solution that makes sense. So there's a lot of things like that, like Lyle, understanding and seeing all these people in an airplane and the one little survivor. Those things happen. And I put all that kind of in the same box as crop circles, because there's really no good explanation for it in physical terms. It just happens.
So in an extreme sense, then, there is no objective reality. Because like one time you had told me that, I said, well, from here to eternity, it can't all be subjective. And you said it has to be.
Yeah, there is no objective reality. As our picture gets bigger and bigger, what we keep seeing over and over again, the same pattern occurs, is that you have a small view. Okay? And in that small view, you have kind of your own physics, if you will, the way things work. Okay? And there's some things there that are mysterious that you don't know. You back out and you get a bigger view, and suddenly the mysterious things now aren't so mysterious anymore, because you can see it from a bigger view. And we see that, and that keeps going out as you get a bigger view. And what happens is that the physics you had in that little reality then becomes a subset. It's still true. I mean, it's not that those people were hallucinating their physics, but now that's just an approximation to a bigger thing. So we get to quantum mechanics and relativity, and Newtonian mechanics then becomes a subset. It's true within these limitations. It becomes an approximation. So if the distances aren't too small and if the speeds aren't too fast, that's the approximation, then Newtonian physics does really well. About 99% of all the physics that actually gets applied in this world is Newtonian physics, because generally we don't move that fast and deal in things that small, so it works fine for us. And the flat earth is the same thing, that's an approximation. If you have a big enough sphere and the little place on that sphere seems like it's flat. Okay, because the curvature is there's so little curvature because the sphere is so big. So then the flat earth becomes an accurate, well, I shouldn't say accurate, but an approximate. It's an approximation. Well, in this reality, you get to the very same thing. Once you get up in a little bigger picture, you realize that an objective reality is just an approximation. It works most of the time under certain conditions. Well, what are the conditions? It's those things for which there is little uncertainty. Well, what things are a little uncertainty? Well, basically the rule set, right? The physics. You drop something, it falls down. It's not like sometimes it falls down, sometimes it falls sideways, The physics here says, the rule set says that we live in this gravitational field on this planet, and that's the way it works. So those things are very uncertain. Very certain, okay, because that's the rule set. So what's the uncertainty? What's the probability that it'll just fall up? Pretty small, you see. It could be a very big updraft, right at that minute or something. But the probability of that happening is so small that becomes approximately an objective reality. So when you're dealing with things of the rule set, there's just teeny little bits of wiggle room. Now you get down into things that are very small. Now we're on the scale of atoms and electrons and things like that. What's the uncertainty? So it starts to grow, right? It starts to get really big. So when you're in the world where there's lots of uncertainty in the physics, if you will, because we don't know where that electron is, because we can't see it, we can't grab hold of it, we can't tie a string around it. So it could be here and it could be there and we don't know. Well, suddenly you're in a world where there's lots of uncertainty. And guess what? That world then gets to be obviously not objective. You see, it becomes a statistical reality. Okay, now here in this macro world, things are pretty certain. Physics kind of ties us down. Okay. And if you go into the details of it, where is my hand right now? And if you try to take that down to a nanometer, you can't do it. Because even though it looks like my hand's relatively still, put it there, it's even stiller, it's not. It's moving. The skin's going up and down. You know, molecules they're all over the place, you see. So once you get down to that micro level, uncertainty gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But then we don't care much because that uncertainty to us, in our experience with our senses, is so tiny it doesn't make any difference. If my hand's oscillating, you know, in the nanometer range, it makes no difference. Okay, but if we measure down in that range, it does make a difference, and things get real squirrely, and the fact that we don't live in objective reality becomes obvious. You see? So that's how that works. So at our level, with the physics here, then we live in an approximate objective reality because the uncertainty is small. It's just like the flat earth is that's good science, flat earth, if your sphere is big enough, right? But you take that bigger view and suddenly say, oh, well, that's not right. Actually, even if you measure an inch, there's a little bit of curvature there, but it's at the 15th decimal place or something, so we don't care. Well, it's the same way that we are. So it's an approximate objective reality. And because physics is a hard science, you know, they call the hard sciences. Well, the hard sciences are the sciences that deal with the rule set where there's very little uncertainty, right? So in their mind, reality is objective because there's very little uncertainty. That's like in that little place on the big sphere, everything's flat, you know, and if you're only dealing with a square mile, flat's good when you got something like this Earth that's got I can't remember, you know, like a 25,000 mile circumference or something. So it's the same thing. So that's why we have this idea that reality is objective. It's just an approximation, but a good approximation because where it's not objective is so small that we don't notice. That's why the quantum mechanics people will tell you that this only applies to small things. You see, it doesn't apply only to small things, it's just that we only notice it when we look and measure at small things. That's where it shows up for us because that's where uncertainty is big. But then we do the little thing that you've all heard on the workshops and things. You know, if the tree falls in the wood, does anybody hear it? You know, and I go through the explanation that, well, you walk into the woods and there's a wobbly tree, you leave, you come back 5 years later and there's one laying on the ground. It didn't really have to fall, you see. But because we believe that we live in objective reality, we find that difficult to deal with, difficult to understand. Well, of course it had to fall. It can't get there if it didn't fall, right? Because that's our belief in an objective reality, that it can't go from one state to the other without doing all the states in between, which is the falling. Well, it's not necessarily the way our reality works, you see. Now, so here you have on a macro scale the same idea that reality is not objective. You walk in and you see the tree laying on the ground, well, it's just because that is probable where it would be, and that's what you see. Because this is not an objective physical reality. This is a reality made of data and information, and it's statistical. And it's like that from the ground up. It's like that at the atomic level. It's like that at this level. It's like that everywhere. One reality, our physical reality is consistent all the way through and through. But here in the macro world, it seems objective because that's that part of the world that we interact with where the rule set basically has very little probability. So with that belief that we make everything like that. So it has to be aliens with energy beams because to us that's physical. It's the only way it could happen. So that's our guess. Well, not necessarily true. We don't need to jump to those conclusions. So that's kind of the thing, and basically the way that stacks up with why, how does it that quantum mechanics works at the little weird level, and at this level it's objective. It's just a matter of uncertainty and how big that uncertainty is and how much we can notice it. Now here's an interesting experiment which may trigger some other things. Experiments have been going on in like double slit and so on for many, many years. And there's one that I haven't said much in my workshops, but it illustrates this point, and it also illustrates the point of why physics today doesn't seem to have made any progress in this area. And if you do a double slit experiment And in that experiment, and I don't have to explain that, right? Everybody knows what I'm talking about because you've all seen the videos and whatever else. Okay, this is the advanced group. If you do that double slit experiment, and now what I'm telling you is kind of a thought way of putting together. You know, I guess more appropriately one would say, you know, I'm putting this into a more pedagogical explanation. In other words, I'm making it simple so it's easy to understand. Okay, but it's still the truth and it's still the way it works, but I'm making up the details. Okay, so if we do a double slit experiment and we do it, let's say 100 times or 1,000 times, and every one of these 100, let's say just 1,000, let's make big numbers. Okay, since we're making it up, we can make it up any way we want. So let's do it 1,000 times, and each time we are taking the data at the slits so we know exactly which slit and when a particle goes through it. And let's say we're doing this not with photons but with electrons or anything, doesn't matter, atoms, you know, buckyballs, hydrogen atoms, anything, doesn't make any difference. Well, it's at a level that it has a lot of uncertainty for us, so it's small. But even big things like buckyballs, which are like 60 you know, carbon atoms together in a soccer ball shape, have a lot of uncertainty for us because they're still pretty small. Anyway, so you do these things 1,000 times, and every time you know exactly where the, say, electron went through the slit. So you have all the data. Now, if you looked at each of these 1,000, what would you expect to see? You would expect to see the two little dots, right behind the slits, because you collected the data and you know when each electron went through each slit. So you have that information. You don't expect an interference pattern. Okay, but let's say that we don't look at them. As we do those 1,000, we take the plate at the back, which is the screen. Okay, it's a light-sensitive screen, or an electron-sensitive screen, if you will, if we're doing electrons. And we take that data and we put it in an envelope. Okay, like taking poetic license here. We put it in an envelope. And we take the data measured from the measuring devices at the slits, we put that in an envelope. So now we've put everything that's important in an envelope. The data in an envelope and the result in an envelope without looking at them. Okay, because these things aren't really light spots on a screen so much as they are data collected in an instrument. All right. So we have both of those. We put them each in an envelope.
No, I was saying, you have the two scenarios, one measured and one...
None. All of them were measured. All 1,000 of them were measured.
So it either went through one slit or the other?
Went through one slit or the other, and we know which slit.
Never went through both?
And we have the data that indicates that they went through one slit or another.
Never both?
Never both.
Okay.
One particle at a time. Okay? So like I say, if we were to look at all of these, we'd know what we'd get would be two little spots behind each slit. That's what we'd get if we looked at each one. But we're not looking at them.
So it could be either A or B happened, A or B, A or B?
A or B, A or B, so we're going to get a little spot behind A and a little spot behind B. Okay, that's where we are. We get 1,000 of them, but we don't look at any of them. Okay, we don't look at any of them. The data is just collected in a machine someplace. Okay, and we take the data collected on the back screen, which is where the light spots are, or the electron spots are, or whatever, and we put that in an envelope.
Without looking at it?
Without looking at it. We take the data that told us which slit it went through. That's the data collected. So you got data collected, two spots, right? We got the data collected by the detectors, data collected by the result, the screen at the back. We take those data, put each one in an envelope, and take those two envelopes and put them in another envelope. So now that envelope has the results of that experiment in it. Okay? Now, we'd have 1,000 of these. We take all 1,000 of them and we put them in a vault someplace and we let them sit there for a decade. Okay? Now they're 10 years old. They've been sitting there for a decade. Nobody has seen any of the data. Okay, now you get all 1,000 of them out, and here's what happens. First of all, you open the big envelope. Now, if you open the envelope that has the detection data in it next, okay, you're still not looked at the result. You're going to open up the data with the detection data in it. Now you take that envelope and you can do one of two things with it. If you set a match to it and burn it, now that data's gone. Nobody ever looked at it. Nobody ever saw it. The data's gone. Right? So let's say we do that with 500 of them, half of them. And we put those over here in this side of the room. And the other half we don't burn anything. We put those over on the other side of the room. Okay, now all what was on the plates, data, was done 10 years ago. That's over, right? The equipment's been taken down, everything's gone. That's done. Now what you'll find out then is that the 500 of them where you burned the data, you get an interference pattern when you open up the screen. When you actually take up the back screen, you get an interference pattern. When you look at the 500 of them that you didn't burn them, and you still have the data, the slit went, what slit the particle went through, you get two little dots behind each slit. Okay. Now again, I've made it up in the sense that makes it easy to see. But now what that says is that what was on that screen was defined 10 years later when one decided either to burn or not to burn the data. You see, it was still in the probable future. And it wasn't until somebody made the decision whether to burn that data or not burn the data that the result on the screen actually became a result. Up until that time, it was still in the future and still probability. You see? So now we've got a problem in that it was a done deal, 10 years old, but it actually hadn't existed yet. It wasn't existent. Now we who believe in a deterministic, or I should say in an objective reality, you see we can't deal with that because it's 10 years old data. And whatever was on that screen was on it, period, and you can't change it because that happened 10 years ago and it was a result. And in an objective reality, that can't take place. That's impossible. In a statistical, probabilistic reality, it's possible because that doesn't exist yet. It's never come into this reality frame. It's still just probability. And where there is data, where there is, this reality, it's not just probabilistic and statistical, but it's based on information. Where you have the information to show which slit it came through, then the result reflects that. Where you don't have the information to show which slit it, then the result reflects that. It's just a matter of information. And the key thing is the information available? When you burn it, it's no longer available. So what happens in the backplate comes out one way. See, it's a mistake to think that what was on that back plate was done and and can't change now because we live in objective reality. Now, because that's the way that's the way the experiments came out. What do physicists or what do people whose careers and who believe very strongly in objective reality, because that's what they do all the day. They work in that area of the rule set where there's tiny little uncertainty, and their reality is objective. Shall we say, the scientific method is a good method. It works, just like surveying works in a flat, in a flat reality, even if that reality is on a really big sphere. Your triangles, your hypotenuse is the square root of the sum of the squares. Well, that's all plane. That's planar stuff. Works real good on the surface of a very big sphere. Well, so physicists look at that and they say, that's impossible. It can't happen. How can something that's been done 10 years ago, which had to be complete and finished, right? That screen, that data was there. How could that suddenly be changed a decade later based on what you do with the information that defines it? Well, what you do about it, if you're a physicist that cares about your job, is you kind of ignore it. And you say, well, there's no reason, forget it, and you just go on and you do your job and you do something else because it's not something that you can explain. You have no idea why reality should be that way. Okay. So eventually, you just kind of give up on it because it's not a career builder, it's a career sink because there's no explanation for it.
Tom, how did you know that you take the plates that were burned, you say the ones that were burned, they had an interference pattern? Oh, because then after you first you take out the data from the detectors,
And depending on what you do with the data from the detectors will determine what is on that plate.
10 years in advance?
10 years after the fact that those
Okay, so
plates,
10
that the
you
data
didn't-
for those plates was taken.
Okay, you said that we knew there was an interference pattern on the plates that were burned.
Okay, yes, so
How did
after,
we all I want to know is how did we know that?
oh, let's say you look at it. So you have, you
No, we're
open
not
up
supposed to.
you open up the other envelope. You got two envelopes in each of those packages. One envelope was the screen. When I say the screen, that's the thing that the
Yeah,
electrons
that's what I'm calling it.
caught on. Okay, that's the thing that shows the interference pattern.
And you have both of those packages in a separate package.
Right.
The data hasn't even seen the data.
Nobody's seen the
One end,
data.
data from the other end. You put those in separate packages and you put them in an envelope.
Right.
You have 1,000 of those. You burned 500 of them. You take, and you said those 500 that were burned have an interference pattern.
No, yes,
Okay,
it's
that's what I
500 to burn
understood.
have an interference
How do
pattern.
we know that? Because we never looked at.
No, you look at the other envelope. After you burn the data, after you burn envelope 1 that has
Which
the
has
detector
both one and
data in
two.
it, then you open envelope 2 and see what the
Okay,
pattern
so you're
is.
not burning both sets of data.
No, you're just burning the one that has the detector data in it. After you burn, then you open the other one to see what the result is. You see? I'm sorry, that wasn't clear. So you have the two envelopes. So you take the one that has the detector data in it, that tells you which,
You don't put them both into one envelope at the end. You keep them all separate. Because if you took the envelope that had both the detector and the screen.
yeah, you don't burn that. Right, you open that envelope up, you pull out the data from the detectors, you set it on fire, then you say, well, let's see what the result was, and you look at the result, you either get an interference pattern or not. You see, that's the way.
Is that the measurement though? I mean, is it burning the envelope, is that the observation?
No, what happens when you burn the envelope is you make the information either available or not
Yeah,
available.
so that becomes an observation.
Yes,
or
but
measurement.
it's uncertain
That
because
determines what's
was
gonna
it,
happen on the.
separation,
That the-
just volunteer, yeah.
Yeah.
It's uncertainty. Is it uncertainty? It's uncertain.
Until it's observed.
It's
it's
uncertain.
So, yeah, well, what happens is that if you have information telling you which slit the particles went through, then you will not have an interference pattern, because you know that they went through this slit, then that slit, then that slit, then that slit, and you will know that you will get just 2 dots behind each slit. Okay, but we don't know because nobody's ever looked at the data. You see, so now we can say that well, they all should have had no interference pattern because we made the measurement. But you see, it's not just the making the measurement. It's not just the collecting the data. It's whether or not that data is in this reality and is available. So if it's not, because you burn it, then suddenly there is no information to say which slit any of it went through. So it's uncertain. You don't know. Well, you end up with an interference pattern.
Okay, yeah.
You see, and the other one, well, here's the information. We can see exactly which slit it went through. You end up with 2 dots. And this is after the fact. This is 10 years later. In objective reality, what was in that second envelope, which was what I'm calling the screen, the collector of the electrons, the collector of the light, whatever, that has the interference pattern or the 2 spots on it, that should have been a done deal because that happened 10 years ago. The experiment was done. But you see what's there. It's the same as you walk into the woods and you find the log lying on the ground. Why? Because it's probable. Okay?
But only until it's actually measured when you see it. But we were talking yesterday about how if a probability, let's say Claudia and I were talking about it, if a guy's on an island and there's no sentient beings on the island other than the guy, and he's standing under a tree and there's a wind gust that comes and there's a probability that that branch could fall, he's not observing that branch. And can that probability collapse itself and kill that sentient being?
Well, sure. You have a rule set. The rule set says that if you bend a branch, further than its elastic limit,
There's no observation being made, there's no measurement. So the probability can actually who's making that measurement?
They
in
measure
order
the
to?
island by making it. They're on the island, so they're measuring it, right?
Who's
your environment exists. It's like, why is it that when the guy comes back 5 years later into the woods, he just still doesn't, why does he still see a wobbly tree? You have a rule set and you have a reality frame. Okay, physical matter reality is a reality frame. There's a rule set going on and it's evolving. Everything here is evolving. Okay, so it doesn't take us to look at it for it to evolve.
Independent of ascension,
It's all
observation,
it's
what
all
you're saying.
data evolving in the computer. So the computer simulation says over here there's a little thing, and it's down in a vent at the bottom of the sea, 5 miles under the sea, in a methane vent, and it's evolving. Little life forms are evolving down there. It didn't require a measurement for them to be there. It only requires a measurement for us to become aware of them. And when we go down and make that measurement, we get that data. So it's like reality is created for us on the fly, as we go, as we observe. But it's created to be consistent with our rule set. What could happen? What could evolve there? So there's no need in giving you information that's not part of your sense data, right? You only get the information you need. So right now, I'm not getting any information about the back wall. I don't need any information about the back wall. I don't have any sensors that are sensing the back wall. So why would a system be pouring information to me about the back wall and what's on the other side of the back wall and what's going on on the beach in Hawaii right now and all that coming into my mind? It wouldn't. That's a waste.
Collapse itself is what you're saying based on the rules.
Yeah. So basically, the rule set evolves, sets up the probabilities. It's not that it collapses itself. It sets up the probabilities that define the data that you will get when you make the measurement, or then anybody else makes the measurement. So if somebody then, 100,000 years later dives down to that vent, they'll find little, thingies down there living in the methane. Okay. If nobody dives down there, then those little thingies living in the methane are just probable. You see, none of it exists. What's confusing you is you're thinking of an objective physical world existing. And if you think of an objective physical world existing, then all these issues come up. Well, it doesn't. The world is just created for you moment by moment, delta t by delta t. And it's a shared reality. So we all have to interact, and it all has to be consistent for you and I, and it's all one consistent reality.
I would put it in words like it's a simulation that
Yeah.
keeps getting updated. But that simulation is objective in a way.
That simulation is not objective. The simulation has rules, okay? And where the uncertainty is small, it appears to be objective. Where the uncertainty is larger, it appears not to be objective. Now, we talk about hard sciences, and hard sciences are in that area where it is it's approximately objective. Now let's talk about soft sciences. Soft sciences are a little different because they deal in things where there's lots of uncertainty. We're talking about psychology, sociology, places where there are a lot of uncertainty. There is a lot of uncertainty. Well, what have they found out? Well, how does that science evolve? They found out if you don't do double blind and triple blind, you can't, you can't say anything about the results. Why? Because they have this uncertainty. Do physicists, when they're measuring how long a stick is, need double blind and triple blind? No, because the uncertainty is so small, it doesn't matter. Do psychologists trying to find out whether, if you yell at the children in the classroom every day, it raises or lowers their IQ? Do they need double blind and triple blind and all kinds of things like that? Sure, because otherwise they find out that because of the uncertainty, reality is so squirrely, they can't depend on the result. You see, that's why you need double blind and triple blind, because to get rid of the influences, to get rid of the fact that mind, intent is changing probability. Okay, so you have to do these in the soft sciences to help control, I guess, the influences. The influences on the results. Any experiment, you want to eliminate as many variables as possible so that you're just measuring this one thing that you want to measure and look at. So all these other variables you need to get rid of so you can see the effect of this on that. There may be 10 different things affecting this and that. You get them all done but one, and then you can tell something about how this one thing affects that. If you got all 10 things affecting stuff, it's really hard to tell what's going on. So science tends to want to eliminate those variables. That's what double blind is doing. It's eliminating influences so that you can get it down to something that you can then make a statement about. So they find, you will find that, doing, like testing drugs by law, we have to test all drugs to see whether or not they are better than the placebo effect. That's just, if they aren't, then they're not allowed to be marketed because they're not seen as being any more effective than sawdust.
Except they don't
You know?
control for what's in the placebos.
So, yeah, and they have to do all this, yeah, and they can't just, yeah, they have to do double blind, triple blind on the placebo trials, otherwise they don't work. They won't work. Well, why don't they work? That's because people can influence the results if they know about them. Why do we need double blind on anything like that? Well, it's because you can influence those results with your mind. You know, it's the same reason why the gentleman who freezes water, you know, and he has these water crystals, and the crystals are beautiful, the crystals are ugly based on his thoughts about the water. Well, you do that on a double blind, it doesn't work. It doesn't work well, therefore the guy's a fake, right? Well, no, he's not a fake. It's his mind, it's his intent. It's not that the water doesn't like acid rock. It's that he doesn't like acid rock, therefore he gets ugly water that freezes, because he said, what could possibly, you know, be pretty and like this stuff? You know, this is obviously ugly music. So he gets ugly results. Somebody who really liked acid rock and couldn't stand Beethoven would have just the opposite results, you see? It's the experimenter. Okay, you do this in a double blind and it doesn't work, the guy's a fraud because that's not science, because science has this scientific method. And the scientific method has an assumption. It's an implicit assumption that nobody says, but the assumption in the scientific method is that we live in an objective reality. Because only in an objective reality can you do an experiment and then have anybody else repeat the experiment, has to get the same answer, right? And so on. Well, that's an objective reality. That's the scientific method. The scientific method is just like surveying in flatland. It's an approximation that works good in places where there's a little uncertainty, okay? But in the larger reality, the scientific method isn't a good method. It doesn't hold. It holds real well under these conditions, low uncertainty, and then it's perfect. And then, I shouldn't say it's perfect, but it separates the wheat from the chaff. It separates what's valuable in that area from what's superstitious, from what's, you know, not valuable, from what's not, you know, doesn't work. And as such, the scientific method is really good. That's what brought us to where we are now, rather than, you know, still bleeding people, you know, to make them well. Scientific method can kind of sort that out, you see, because that's an objective thing. You go to areas like quantum mechanics, well, it doesn't seem to work anymore, because if we had an objective reality, what happened 10 years ago and all those data couldn't change. They'd have to all come out, all 1,000 all have to be the same. And it wouldn't matter whether you burned the data or not, it would be irrelevant, because what was on that final plate was on that final plate 10 years ago and can't change. You see, so the scientific method is a good thing in its place. Surveying with planar geometry is on a flat surface is good. And it's very, very good if you put it on a really big sphere. It's approximately good, okay? So now you go to things like crop circles, and you go to other kind of things like that where there's a lot of uncertainty in the events. There's a lot of uncertainty. How did you get there? Where did it come from? You know, how could it be done? You got all this uncertainty about it. Nobody knows. Trees falling over in the woods, all sorts of things, even on the macro level. There's a lot of things that are uncertainty. Soft sciences, a lot of uncertainty. Now you have to deal with that uncertainty in some sort of way. And in the soft sciences, they deal with it by double-blind experiments so that people don't influence the results. Otherwise, people do influence the results. That's the problem. They found out if you tell the doctor whether or not he's giving, you know, sugar or, you know, or medicine, the results are different than if you don't tell the doctor that. If you tell the patient whether they're getting, you know, sawdust or the medicine, the results are different. These are influences. Well, how do they influence that? Isn't it just physical? They take the substance in their body, that substance does something physical, and either they get better or they don't. What do you mean they influence the result? That's impossible. But science tells you that if you don't do it double blind, you get different answers every time you do the experiment, depending on, you know, what you tell the people. So that's because there's uncertainty there. And the uncertainty, so how do you get rid of the uncertainty? The influence based in that area of uncertainty, you get rid of that influence by not telling people, so they don't have an opinion, so they don't have an intent about how the outcome is going to come out. So, you know, you're basically controlling the information, is what you're doing. Our reality is based on information.
Yeah, that's
Ted?
the same
Go ahead. Ted's being very polite. He's raising his hand. Yeah.
I think earlier, as discussion was going on and questions being asked, that I detect something that's causing a little confusion. And that there seems to be some thinking that this simulation is being carried on as a detailed simulation, point by point, item by item, event by event. And it's really not that way at all. It totally stays in terms of probability until it has to be objectified into a data stream to present to a consciousness.
Right.
And I think that, you know, there's a movie, which I haven't seen, but I mean, everything is a simulation in the movie, but they're simulating everything, whether there's someone there or not. In other words, you walk out of the room and close the door, and whatever's going on in that room is still there. But it's not. It's all just probability until you look at it.
Yeah, for you. You see, now if somebody else is still in that room, then that room is being rendered to them. Once you walk out of the room, it's no longer being rendered to you. And if everybody walks out of the room, it's not being rendered to anyone.
If there's bugs in the room, it's only being rendered to the parts that they're involved with. If there's bugs or something in the room.
Yeah, if there's bugs in the room, it's being rendered to a bug's eye view of reality. Exactly. But the fact that it's not being rendered, let's say there are no bugs, there are no people, there's nobody in the room, the fact that that room's not being rendered in our minds, because we have this belief about an objective reality, we suddenly see the room disappearing. How can the room disappear? That doesn't make any sense. Well, that's because of our belief in an objective reality. The room didn't disappear. The room didn't even appear. The room doesn't exist. The room's just data, you see. And it's a probability. And everybody that's associated, that's interacting with that room then gets that data, and it's a shared multiplayer game. When that, you know, it's not that the room disappears, the room was never there to begin with. The room is just data in the minds of consciousness, and it's according to probability, what's likely to be there. And that's what we see. And we can change that probability with our intent, you see, and that's what drives things like the placebo effect and makes those crystals be pretty when the guy doing it thinks the music and the words and things are pretty. You know, it's just an expression of his intent. Okay, and why ice crystals? Well, because we know, you know, there's no two snowflakes that are exactly alike. Why? Because there's so much uncertainty in the way that they can form. Well, when you have that much uncertainty, you can modify the results with your intent.
Will the psi uncertainty principle and the rules that ever change as more and more people, I guess, their perspective on reality changes and grows?
Yeah, it's an interactive system. Exactly.
So the rules will, you know, if everybody decides that tomorrow that, wow, this is a larger reality and the awakening, as people are calling it, gains momentum, will the psi uncertainty principle have to change to accommodate?
Sure. Things will change. The reality we find here is partly because of who we are, right? And what we are. We're defining a lot of this reality. It's here for us. It's here for us to interact and learn. And if we're different, it's different. It's like we're playing in this game. And this is a virtual reality trainer, right? And this trainer is the way it is because it's reflecting the way we are. It's kind of what we make it to be. So as we change, then we make it to be something else. It is something else. And psi uncertainty may apply differently to that different thing. It's a dynamic thing. Yes, it's all probability. So that it doesn't always have to be just like this. We could all grow up And then there would be no,
Place.
yeah, it'd be a different place.
Do you think that has to do with the, how comfortable people are able to become with uncertainty? And that seems to be a effect of the bigger picture.
Well, yes, it does, you know, how comfortable people are with uncertainty has a lot to do with fear. Okay? And as much as you have fear, you have a lower, you have a poorer reality to live in. A reality that's full of fear. You have a high entropy reality there. So one of the big fears, one of the fears that creates a great deal of problem is this fear of uncertainty. Because if we have in an objective world, what you want to do is control things. It's an objective world. You can make things come out the way you want. You can control them because everything is in a objective causal chain. So if you can go in and manipulate that causal chain, then you can make things come out the way you want. Okay, that's what allows us to build skyscrapers, right? Because again, that's in that low uncertainty part of our world. That is objective. Appears to be objective. It's not really objective, but it's approximately objective. Just like Newtonian physics is approximately correct, right? It's approximately objective. Okay, but when you have fear, then that's kind of pulling you the wrong way. The reality that you generate then, the reality that you create gets uglier as you have fear. It gets less effective. It gets less effective for you to grow, for you to lower your entropy. And one of our big fears is uncertainty. If we can't control that objective world and things happen that don't make sense, and we can't depend on things, we can't depend on other people, we can't depend on then it frightens us because now we don't have control. If we don't have control, something bad might happen to us because we have to have control to keep ourselves safe, to keep ourselves doing what we want to do. And without all that control, what could happen? Maybe somebody will jump out from behind a fence and eat us. We don't know. And that frightens us. So then we don't want to go outside. Or then we start carrying guns, and then some little kid rustles in the brush and we shoot him because we were frightened that it might have been a monster, and suddenly our world starts to get uglier and uglier. And a lot of that has to do with just being afraid of not being able to control things. We in our culture tend to be kind of control freaks. We want to control everything. We want things to work out the way we want them to work out. And when they don't, it frightens us. And if we feel like everything's out of control, I don't control anything, it's like a scary feeling. That's what drives people into insane asylums and things. They have a hard time dealing with that uncertainty. Sure.
With all that, I mean, people's attitudes of fear, does the quantum effect actually sometimes make things happen? I mean, in the way they're fearful, if they're constantly negative or fearful of,
If you're constantly, what happens is that you create your reality in many ways. We make this reality. And in some ways we don't. We still have a rule set. We have to abide by the rule set here, so we can't control that. That's outside of our control. That's the game, that's the structure of the game that we're in. But still, we have a lot of ways we influence our reality. And one of them is with our intent. That's why placebo effect, that's why you have to double blind, because if the doctors know, it comes out differently than if they don't know. If the patients know, it comes out differently than if they don't know. Okay, our intent changes the probabilities. So you have, as Ted says, this reality is just happening. It's probabilistic, and it happens as we make the measurement. And we do that collectively. Okay, so if we have, our intent is fearful, something terrible is going to happen. Something terrible is going to happen. If I walk down this road and there's all these bushes, something's going to jump out behind one of those bushes and get me. Then you've just raised the probability that something will jump out behind a bush and get you, because you're creating your reality out of your fear. Okay? In that kind of a reality, those kinds of things will happen because it's possible, they could happen. It's just a probable reality. And if you have a whole lot of people, who are very fearful, then suddenly you have a whole lot of things jumping out behind bushes, grabbing those people. Because that's the kind of reality you create. Now, if you want to work that into more physical terms, you make it easier for those people that might want to jump out behind a bush to go jump out behind a bush because now they're kind of being encouraged by all this fear. You see, if you want to try to, make it a psychological thing, but really that's, it all has to work together. Everything has to be consistent.
So the quantum effect has nothing to do with it?
I'm not sure what you mean by a quantum effect.
Well, I mean, if, like they say, people that talk about sickness are always negative or
Yeah.
always positive, they become
Right.
successful.
Right.
Well, doesn't quantum have something to do?
No, that's not a quantum effect. What that is an effect of modifying reality with your intent.
But I mean, in a way, is intent sort of part of that?
Intent is just it's sort of, you might call it will. It's that active part of consciousness. It's that active part of consciousness that, I don't know. Intent's a hard thing, and some video I had, I talked about intent. I don't even know what I said. I make everything up as I go. So when you ask me again, I have to make it up again.
No, I know, but the fact that if you think of something like the guy
Yeah.
who's looking at the water,
Mm-hmm.
and he has this intent, he hates that music, doesn't that affect the way?
Things on a quantum level?
On a quantum level?
No, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that it affects things on a quantum level. I'd say it just affects the result.
Well, that's what I meant.
Yeah, it just affects the result of how that water freezes, but that doesn't necessarily affect things, well, you can say, well, that, the way that ice freezes has to do with the molecules of the ice, which have to do with the atoms, in the molecules and so on like that. But it's not so much like you're affecting the what do you call it, the subatomic particles, then you're affecting the atomic particles, and you're affecting the, you can think of it, but now you're going back into this objective reality where everything has to be built up, from the ground. It's not so much like that. It's just that you're just affecting the results.
Well, that's what I meant.
Yeah, you just affect the results of the way those molecules freeze, the arrangements they put themselves in, you affect that. And now if you go in and study how the molecules got arranged and other kinds of things, you might find that they were such as to make that happen. But what you're really doing is affecting the result on a macro level. The rest of the stuff just has to get in line if you look at it. If you don't look at it, it doesn't have to get in line. It's that sort of thing. So you're affecting the result.
Could it be said like the answer to this question is yes and no actually. So if you're just going to look at the overall results, it's not doing it at the quantum level. Okay, it's just the result. If you go down and measure it to the subatomic part, then it is doing
You'll
it
affect it there
at the
too.
quantum
Well,
level.
that's what I meant.
Yeah, you're only affecting it where the measurement's made. And if the measurement's made is that you look at the ice crystals and you see that they're pretty, then that's all the effect it has to be. It all has to be rendered to you as the pretty ice crystals. Now, if you go in and study it down to a lower level, then they got to render that. You study it down to the, then you have to render that. So no, it doesn't have to start at the bottom. It's not like you have to rearrange the subatomic particles so that it all ends up in these pretty ice crystals. You're just making a result. And if nobody looks down into it, then none else has to be done. It's just, we're living in this place of information. And it's because we believe that the world is objective, we think that then it has to all be done from the ground up to make it, to get to here. It doesn't really. It's just starts here in the middle, you see? And the rest of it doesn't have to be done unless you really care to dig in and look at it and examine it. Then that has to be done too. So again, it hits us very oddly. You see that we're not living in an objective reality. It's part of our culture. It seeps into our bones and blood. We have this thing about being in an objective reality. So we make these assumptions. Well, of course, if the ice crystal is like this, then the atoms, that made up the molecules and the elements, all that had to be changed. But that's just because that's our belief. Just like somebody had to make those crop circles. See? We believe that somebody had to do it because otherwise it couldn't be there. And reality is not actually like that. Now, if you have a bunch of people standing around that field, let's say we get a big field and we think there's going to be a crop circle there, so we line the field with people shoulder to shoulder to inspect it, and we have a couple of helicopters, with infrared cameras watching it. What's going to happen? Nothing, right? Nothing. So, see, So it only happens because everybody goes to bed at night and nobody's watching the field. Then it can happen because then you have the uncertainties preserved, you see. So that's the psi uncertainty principle.
With the ice crystals, was we were just discussing a little bit, in the experiment, was you have the freezer, the container of water,
Mhm.
the music,
Mm-hmm.
and the person.
Right.
Was he there at the time?
Wouldn't
Or
ma-
was he listening to the music while it was happening, or did he just play the music, he knew what it was, he knew in his
Doesn't-
already conscious he didn't like it and left the room, and just played the music with the water?
Doesn't matter. You see, it doesn't matter. He could be 100 miles away on the other side of the planet, and he could have a machine that randomly played music, and it wouldn't matter. So you're thinking an objective situation. You're looking for objective causes. And it's not like that. In his mindset, pretty music makes pretty causes, makes pretty crystals. Ugly music makes ugly crystals. And
How did the ice know? How did the water know?
Ice doesn't-
How did the water
Yeah.
know how he felt about it?
none of it knows. It's just that in his mind, his intent is creating the reality, you see. You're trying to make it objective and build a causal chain. The causal chain isn't there. You see, and we all do that out of habit. It's just the way we think. We want to build these causal chains that are objective. So sure, he can put on a random music selector, and then he can go on a vacation and come back later, and still, he got pretty ice crystals for pretty music. But what defines pretty music? He does. He defines what pretty music is. And it doesn't matter when it's played, how it's played, who's there, who's not, whether it's randomly selected, whether he's there or not, none of that makes any difference. In his reality, pretty music makes pretty ice, and he sets up that situation, and he goes and he looks at the ice, and he has pretty ice with his pretty music. You see? But now somebody else will get different results. And if you take a bunch of people who really don't have that, and part of it is belief. We all remember Dorothy, who all she had to do was click her heels together and say, "I'm back in Kansas," and there she was. But it's not really that simple. But belief is a key part of it, because he believes that those ice crystals are responding to that music. He doesn't believe that it's his influence that's creating it. See, he also believes that this is an objective reality, and that somehow that water appreciates the music, the same music he appreciates. You see, he believes that, and because he believes that is part of what feeds his intent. Because the patient believes that sawdust is going to cure, their ailment, is why that happens. So belief can be a focuser, if you will, of your intent.
Belief and expectation.
Expectation is just another part of belief. Yeah, belief, expectation, all those things. Well, so can fear be a focuser of your intent. That's why we get more people jumping out from behind bushes. All of those things, we are a consciousness. We're kind of alive, you see, and we affect things, whether we want to or not. So our beliefs and our fears and all of that stuff are out there manifesting things, changing probabilities, and all of us together, it's all changing a shared reality, and that's what we get. That's why I say we create our own reality, because we are modifying it in that way.
One question. So if there were two people, one expecting good results for certain music and the other one expecting good results for different music,
Mm-hmm.
whoever is going to look at the results first is going to make it happen that way?
Not necessarily. Whoever looks at the results first. You get into like we have here in the physical reality. It's a very good question, Claudio. You have different people wanting different things to happen, right? You'll have some people that want it to go this way, and some people that want it to go that way. And some are putting their intent real hard. They want it to go this way, and some are putting their intent real hard. It's like there's a arm wrestling going on. Somebody's pushing the probabilities this way, somebody's pushing the probabilities that way, and the way it comes out is whoever pushes harder. See? It's not whoever gets there first, but whoever pushes harder. So if you've got 100 people who are very fearful, and you got one or two mixed in that group that says, "Oh, don't worry about it, everything's going to be all right," they kind of get overwhelmed. You see, they get overwhelmed, and so if you had two experimenters, one who liked acid rock and one who liked Beethoven, and you had the same water, and then they were gonna have a contest how the stuff would come out. The one who could put more energy, more power, more effectiveness into their tent would be the one who would get the experiment to come out their way.
I have another question. If somebody at some point put his intent to get certain results,
Mm-hmm.
and then another person puts the intent later on, like example, you open the envelope with a different direction. So it's gonna be a mix of the two.
Mm-hmm.
You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? It's not exactly when they see the results, but also what happened before too.
Yeah, it's going to be a mix of the two. So now look at all the people we have in the world, and we have some lovely intents, we have some ugly intents, we have all this stuff going on, and it is a mix of the two. And what we end up with is some would call it like a vector sum. You get all of those together. This is in this direction, that's in that, and if they're equal and opposite, well, they about cancel out. So what you end up with is a resultant of who we are and what we are going on in this planet. But yes, it is. And when you heal sometimes, you will find that, let's say you heal, somebody has an illness, okay? And let's say that illness is something they really are supposed to experience. It's on their path. That illness is going to teach them something. That illness is part of their experience here. Okay? Now you go in and you try to heal that illness, but yet that illness is important to them in a way. Now they wouldn't say it's important. They'd like to get rid of it, okay, in their intellectual side. But in the bigger picture, that illness is important to them. So you go in and you heal that person, and then right after you heal them, it goes right back to the way it was. And then you heal them again, and then it goes right back to the way it was. You see, you've got this arm wrestling thing going on. You're pushing it one way, and they're pushing another. So let's say you're stronger than they are because their intent isn't really all that focused. Their intent, is not, and yours is. So you work hard on it and hard on it and hard on it, and sure enough, they get better and better and better. And then you go do something else, and it goes right back to the way it was. You see? So you can make modifications like that, but it's very difficult unless you're going to spend the rest of your life or their life working on that, forcing it to be the way you want it. It's going to go back. But if you want to do that, if you want to spend your life working on that thing and putting that energy in it, you can perhaps keep that illness from happening. Okay, but now you've just kind of messed in their game, right? Now you're in their game, changing things that that otherwise wouldn't be that way. So you start to intrude on other people's experiences. So that's, yeah, it can be done. Now, if you go to coastal Africa, and mostly on the coast, some in the interior, but it's really rampant around the coast. And I know this because I have several friends who live there, grew up there. And there is lots of hurting other people. There are people who make their living by threatening others. It's like back in Al Capone, when we do these conference rackets, give me some of your money or I'll burn down your store. And that was happening all over Chicago and other places, right? Probably still happens, but not so much anymore, I guess, not in the open anyway. But that goes on a lot in these coastal African places where, give me some of your money or I'll make you ill. I'll make you sick. And you have people who use their intents in their minds to hurt other people in a shakedown, is what they call it, right? To get stuff from them. That happens all the time. You have hundreds of people using their minds to affect the outcome of a soccer game. Things like that. You have this going on, and because it's in their culture, everybody knows that it works, and it happens. And they can make you sick if you can't defend yourself. And most people don't know much about it, but some people specialize in it. And it gets to be a pretty hairy place to live. It's not very nice. And then that makes you very thankful for the science certainty principle that kind of keeps us from going that direction here, that we don't end up like that. But there are some pretty mean places in the world. And I get into it because these people will come to me and they will be having problems. They're already sending, 30 or 40% of their income back home. And they're being squeezed to send more, that sort of stuff. And they've got all these physical ailments. And, suddenly, things hurt, they get aches, and doctors don't find any reasons, and so on. So I get involved in this, and I have probably 5 or 6 different people. I've worked issues out with them, and you have to go there, and you have to deal with those entities that are doing this sort of stuff. and you have to make it stop. So but that happens routinely. So we can get into that kind of environment, but I tell you, you don't want to live that way. That's not a good way to live. And the sign and certainty principle kind of protects us from that here, because if you stand up and say, hey, I can make you sick, everybody laugh at you. See?
Tom,
Well, that's good for us.
there was a show on, it's totally appropriate to this, so that's why I'm kind of breaking in, on true stories in the ER, like strange stuff that happens in the emergency room. And there was a case where this girl was from an African country. She had been over here, she had been fine, she'd been successful and doing well. And then she ran into someone from her village. Someone else came over and she ran in and the person said, wow, you look really good. How do you look so good? They put a curse on you back home. And she's like, no, they did, because she had done something back home. That's why she left. And then she started feeling she had an evilness in her. And she started trying to get it out. She was pushing on her stomach, struggling to get this out. And she actually made herself sick. She hurt one of her internal organs. And she went to the ER. And so the doctor didn't know all that first. He just, she's sick. When he leaves the room, she starts pushing on her stomach and pushing, but none of the tests are coming back. And she tells him the story. The only thing that was able to get her better was the ER doctors called in a priest or whatever, a voodoo person to remove the thing, and that's how she didn't even know she had a curse on her, and she was fine.
Right, exactly. And that's part of what makes these areas around Africa such a problem for the people that live there, is that everybody knows about it and buys into it. You see, and if that's part of your culture, that just people can do this to me, then that makes you open for them doing that to you. If you have fear that this can be done to you, then that makes you open for that being done to you. And as much as that you don't, then it doesn't affect you. If you're fearless, then it's like you're Teflon coated. It's hard for them to get a hold of you. If you're fearful, they can work on that fear. They can grow that fear. You see, so yes, it's very much like that. And if that person had probably never known that there was a curse on her, probably never would have bothered her.
Yeah.
But as soon as she got fearful about it, then there's a handle now that can affect her.
Yeah.
And it can work on that handle. But all of the people who come from that area, that's part of their belief system. Yes, this is real. Yes, this can hurt you. Yes, you better pay them the money. Yes, it's just the way it is. So, that feeds. You see now in a Western look at that would say, well, that's just a psychosomatic illness. The lady was fine until she became hysterical over the curse, and the hysteria created the problem. And in partial, that's right, in the sense that she started to cooperate with that. As long as she was not cooperative with it, then it's a lot harder. Just like when I say, when you try to heal somebody and that's not cooperative with you, it just keeps going back. Well, it's the same thing. You have to kind of, when these things happen, like Claudia was bringing up, you have these wills basically competing with each other for the way things happen. Well, typically, there's always lessons for everybody. However anything works out, however anything goes, there's things you can learn from it. Whether it's wonderful things happen to you and you win the lottery, or whether you get ill or whatever, there's things that you can learn from that. Even if you just learn to deal with it gracefully, without fear. There's things to learn. And we tend to make this reality and our life here very, very, very important and significant, right? This is our life, and if you were to get an illness and die in a year, it'd be a horrible thing, an awful thing. From a bigger picture, you see, it's not such a terrible, awful thing. We're here to learn. We're in this virtual reality trainer. Things happen. Illness might be a good thing for you to learn. And then if your body dies here, and then you're back in it and something else. And so from a bigger picture, these things aren't as important as we tend to make them. You have to think of, what do I learn from it? What's my learning opportunity? What can I get from this? Is this going to help me decrease my entropy? It's going to help me evolve if I deal with this well. So this horrible thing happens, or I lose my arms and legs, and now I'm just a stump, and somebody pushes me around in a wheelchair. Oh, it's a horrible thing. Or I get paralyzed, from the neck down, and I can't do anything other than blink my eyes and maybe talk. That's a terrible thing. But if you can convert that into a lower entropy state, then that's been a really good thing for you, and it's been a very successful experience for you, you see? So we have to stop thinking in terms of, you know, how much fun we're having, and in terms of what we're learning, and what the opportunities are for us to learn. And if we think of it in that term, then suddenly it's not, oh, that's so awful. We think of it as it's different. It's a different opportunity that you get to learn. And sometimes, you know, it may kill you, sometimes it may not, but that's not really a big deal on a thing where you're just, you know, it's like you're in the video game, right? And you're playing your wizard or your elf or whatever, and he falls in a pit or a monster eats him or something. It's not a really big deal, is it? You know, you go back to the graveyard, you know, he gets reborn, you know, and he runs back out on the field, and 5 minutes later, he's back in there fighting another monster, right? And it's sort of like that here, you know. You guy gets killed, and it's not that big a deal. You know, he pops back up again, and he's back in the game. You know, so if you look at it like that, then, you know, when our wizard or our elf gets killed, we don't go mourn for a week. You know, 30 seconds later, or you know, however long it takes to reconstitute the character and get him back in the game, you know, we're playing it again. It was a minor setback. But if we learn something from it, oh, I won't go into that cave again without, you know, such and such tools, because if I do, a monster will eat me. Then you've learned something, and that's how you get better and better at the game. So this works the same way. So we need to stop thinking about, oh, how awful. You know, poor guy, he's paralyzed from the neck down, and that must be awful, it's so horrible. You know, why does that happen? You know, why do we have all these starving children? Why do we have this terrible stuff? But if you look at it from a different viewpoint, it's not quite as terrible as it seems. It's only terrible from our local viewpoint. Now that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have compassion and that we should be very jaded and hard about everything. Oh, who cares about starving children? You know, that's not the right attitude. We're here to interact, to have compassion, to help people, to help heal them, to help, you know, them grow. And we should be compassionate. We should be involved. But that doesn't mean that we need to have fear about what happens.
But they're not there just so we can help them, right?
No, they're there to learn and grow on their own.
Right, and
It gives
they're
us an
being
opportunity, though.
equipped.
It gives us an opportunity to grow by helping them. But they're not there for us to help. They're there because
To get experience.
to get experience. Okay?
We have two people over there have had hands raised for a while.
Oh, their arms are getting tired, aren't they?
Yeah.
Josh?
Yeah, just going back to the science certainty principle, it's, you can skirt around that if it's just you, if it's not gonna affect other people. Like, for example, if you wanted to prove to yourself the power of intent or something, you get, you know, a couple dice and you wanna roll a certain number, right, 10 times in a row, which is not probable to do, but that's something that the science certainty principle wouldn't affect because it's just you doing it and you're not doing it on national TV or something like that. Is that correct?
Well, yes and no. The psi uncertainty principle wouldn't affect it, but that doesn't mean there aren't other things that would affect it. It depends on why you're doing it, what your intent is, what you're going to do with it. It depends on whether or not it would, let's say, whether or not you roll a 1 10 times in a row with your dice, would depend on what is that going to do to you. How is that going to affect you? What are you going to learn from that? How is that going to help you lower your entropy? How does that take you a step in a spiritual path? And if it turns out it's not, you're just going to go, oh, wow, it works. Okay, I need to get in a dice game. You know, if it's not going to actually help you grow, then it's probably not going to happen. But if it turns out that that happening is an eye-opener for you, and suddenly opens your mind to a larger reality, and it's part of your path to making progress, then it might happen. You see, it's that sort of thing. So it's not all just, you can overpower things with intent. So if you have a strong enough intent, you can maybe just make that happen. But mostly the system also has some input to it. And the system, this is really a nice feature about the system, is that it really wants us to succeed. Our success is its success. We're it. Okay, we're just a piece of it. So as we succeed, it succeeds. So the whole system is set up to help us succeed. That's why this guy was on the airplane and saw that accident before it happened, because that was on his path to finding a bigger reality and growing up. If it wasn't, if he would have just said, wow, that's freaky, you know, and gotten frightened about it, it never would have happened for him. He probably never would have had that experience, because it wouldn't have been it wouldn't have been useful. Now, not all experiences are set up and planned for you. A lot of it is just stuff happens. But if there's a place where you could, with a little nudge, get an advantage, do something better, then often that nudge just happens to come. That's kind of the synchronicity thing. You know, we get nudged in the right directions just about the time we need it. We get information that we need right at the time when it's kind of important for us to have it. So the system is really trying to help us succeed here, but we have to do it. It can provide the opportunity, but we have to actually take that opportunity and make something of it. So that's why some people, like those who are very strong believers in a objective reality, you might call them skeptics, but they're not really skeptical. They're believers for the most part. They're not skeptical at all. They know the truth. They're just skeptical if somebody disagrees with them. But they're not skeptical in general. They're believers, and they have this belief, and they say, well, I've never had a paranormal experience. Well, no, you know. It's not going to do them any good. They're not going to know, they just excuse it. Oh, that didn't really happen. You know, that was just my imagination. You know, it won't end up having an impact on them until they're open enough to the point where that's a growing experience. They're not likely to have one. So, you know, in their experience, it doesn't happen. And then you take somebody else who's very open to, you know, the larger reality, whatever, and they have experiences like that every day. You know, and somebody else has never had one in their life. Well, there's basically a reason for that.
Couldn't the premonition type thing also have worked against the person and to where they would have had, like, why didn't I do something kind of thing?
You know, sometimes people get twisted up about that. They get very upset. There are people that will sometimes know when somebody's going to die. You know, they'll get this idea, well, I suddenly saw a light, you know, around their head, and then they die a couple of days from now. Or I knew an earthquake was going to happen, and you know, you have people like that. And then they start feeling really guilty. Well, I knew this terrible thing was going to happen. I didn't do anything about it. Should I have, you know, tried to save them, tried to warn them, tried to do something? And generally, the answer is no, unless you feel the need to do that. But if it's just information given to you and you get that doesn't mean you're responsible now for, you know, changing the world or making things happen differently.
But
it's not that you're
less
given.
To not feel. That's what I was kind of saying, is it would be part of his, having that experience would be part of possibly the lesson plan for him to get over those feelings of guilty or having done something. So it was an experience to have those feelings, to know about them, and then to get over them.
Yes, that's true. That is a good point. There's some lesson in it. Now, the lesson may be that you're giving this information so you can help somebody out. And it may be that you're just giving this information because it'll help open your eyes to the larger reality. It's what you feel like you need to do. But don't use your intellect to figure that out. Figure it out from the inside out. If you have to use your intellect to figure it out, then it's probably not something you're supposed to do. If you just suddenly get a passion that you need to go tell somebody, you know, don't drive to work today, then go do it. If you don't, and you kind of get the premonition, gee, they're going to hurt on the way to work today, but you don't really feel the need to do anything about it, then it's not yours to do anything about. You're just being given something to let you know that this information is available.
I had the problem of feeling guilty in the past, and I see that's wrong, no matter what.
Right.
I'm learning from you. So that's something that came to me from the intellect. You know?
Right.
But now I adopted that and trying to practice and becoming absorbed into myself, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. What you'll find, and it's a very odd thing, but you'll find that as long as you try to control things, as long as you're trying to manipulate this objective reality to be objective in the way that suits you, you know, you want your children to all grow up and, you know, be brain surgeons. You want, you know, your dog to stop peeing on the carpet. You want all these things to happen in your life, and you put a lot of energy in, you know, you're trying to control your life. And the more you try to control it, generally the more frustrated you get because you can't control it. It just happens, and you get very frustrated with it. So the people who are control freaks generally tend to be frustrated a lot because they It's like you get too many clothes trying to stuff them in a suitcase, and you get this under control and something pops out over there. You get that under control and something pops out on the other side, you know, and you just can't seem to get it all together. And you will learn, though, that when you give up control, when you no longer feel the need to control anything, you say, it'll happen, however it happens, I'll deal with it, I'll learn from it, it's fine, you know, then suddenly, all those things, much of what you would like to happen, or much that pleases you to happen, starts to happen all by itself. And you find out that you have, you know, this is not the right word, but you have the most control when you have no control whatsoever. That when you give up the idea of control, of making things be the way you want them to be, they start turning out to be the way you want them to be. And as much as you try to make them be the way you want them to be, they won't be the way you want them to be. And it's kind of an interesting thing. That you give up control and say, you know, life is, it happens. You know, Brownian notion, I'll deal with it as it comes. Day by day, it happens. You just live in the present moment. You don't worry about it. And suddenly things just seem to happen the way, you know, that suits you. Well, partly by definition, everything suits you. When you have that attitude, there isn't anything that doesn't suit you, right? So, you know,
Yeah, your expectations.
People might want to control you, and it can be wrong.
Yeah, but you know, you get very difficult control when you have no fear. When you have no fear, it's hard for people to control you. Basically, we get controlled by our fear, by our wants, by our needs, by our expectations. And as long as we have these, then it's easier for people to control us. And yeah, so it's interesting that when you give up control and have none, it appears anyway that you have control over almost everything. Not that you're really controlling it, but you mean it just works out. It's useful. Things kind of happen the way, you know, it's like the Japanese invented the just-in-time inventory.
Yeah, my control is going crazy here. He has been so patient. Please answer his question.
Elliot, please.
How are you doing?
Get that hand up there and wave it,
No,
Elliot.
I can't do that. How's everyone? Hey there. Nice to see you. Thanks, everyone. This is like quite something to be in everyone's presence at the same time without a screen, or maybe with a better screen, depending on how you want to look at it. But I'm glad we're getting into intense and will and people going in different directions and the whole kind of dichotomy. And in fact, the most interesting part of the book I like is how there's this strange connection between physics and the idea that the cosmos might have a morality to it, in the sense that, well, if you do this, things are going to work out this way, and if you don't, they work out that way. And I was able to bring it down into a phrase like the universe is either amoral or bemoral. So I was kind of wondering about when we're so as we're here learning, and as it is learning at the same time, in a sense, through us, it makes me question very deeply the difference between participation and manipulation. To what degree is one participating? To what degree is one actually really manipulating? I mean, for example, if someone publishes something like Mein Kampf, you know, to what degree is that, you know, I guess it depends on intent to a degree there. But I guess what I wanted to get to was, for example, one of the things I think I remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, was that I remembered you talking about how, and I'd hate to make this sound bad, but how violence is not always out of the question. I mean, and it made me think of, for example, if someone is just batshit running amok with a bunch of guns through a mall or something like that, and the only way to stop them is to take them down. I mean, I know we don't really like to think that way when we're talking about love and spirituality and that kind of thing, but when you have deeply pathological, aberrant behavior and it's causing mass destruction, I'm wondering how to address that, especially when we take a look at what society is becoming today, because the way it seems to me, and I know how it seems to many people my age, is that we're dealing with a system that is just hell-bent and pathological in all directions, completely corrosive and destructive, and that for what it offers us is not really very rewarding, even if one digs material possession or status or what have you. So I don't know, I'm just intensely curious about what to do. My own intuition is media and publication, talking, communication, and that kind of thing. So much so that even when I was talking about manipulation, I discovered something called E prime, which is a form of English which removes is and be. So instead of saying like, that's a pornographic film, E prime demands that you say, that seems like a pornographic film to me. So you can't, you have to always kind of come back on the fact that it's subjective and that you can't really say the grass is green, but it seems green to me. Anyway, but yeah, I guess a lot of people my age are completely disillusioned with everything we're being offered culturally, psychologically, religiously. Yeah, sure. I guess everyone who's in this room is having a hard time with, you know.
People in the 30s.
Yeah, okay, cool. All right, so everyone here's kind of got this consensus feeling that this is a drag.
Is that a sign of we're getting closer to the exit?
Yeah. Well, that was about at least a dozen questions.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, it's like, how does one participate, right?
Okay.
That's the big one, is how should one participate? How should one not just like, when you see something like BP, it's very, I mean, you know, in the oil spill and just the chaos, it's very hard not to have a reaction that's along the lines of, well, if we just, you know, take care of those buildings and their computers and whatnot, no one will be able to work there, so they won't be able to do this kind of thing, because they're out of control, and in a sense, society really encourages an addiction of greed.
You're helpless.
Yeah,
Like
so
you're
there's a
helpless.
help.
Okay, how do you deal with all of that?
Right.
All right. So first some general things. Yes, it has to do with intent. You know, whether or not you're being helpful or whether or not you're manipulating. It's not the act that's the key. It's the intent that goes with the act, and that's kind of central to all these ideas. What's the reason? You know, what's the intent that you have? Is the intent one of ego, out of ego and fear, or is the intent out of love and caring? Now, sometimes it's hard to tell, but that's the key. That's the key separator in all of them. But now, yes, sometimes violence is appropriate. Sometimes violence is appropriate, you know, when you have to protect yourself or others that need protection. You know, sometimes I told you when people come to me and say I've got non-physical causes are making me ill, and they're from West Africa and they do this, and I go look at it and I can see, yes, there's a bunch of people over here and they're making that person ill. Okay, now what can I do about that? Well, it gets into then a struggle of wills, right? If I just stop it, then is whether or not I have the power to stop what it is they're doing. Do I have that much, and am I going to do that for a very long time? Because they will continue. So, or do I actually do something violent to put an end to it? You see, so you have those kinds of questions, and everyone is different. And sometimes the only answer that works is violence. You'll get into a thing where there is an entity that is doing things to somebody here or even not here, and the only way to stop it, there is no. You work things back in steps. So if you and I are having an altercation, first we try to work it out. But what you want to do is hit me with a stick, and I say, don't hit me with a stick, but you hit me anyway. So then I say, please don't hit me with a stick, you hit me anyway. You see, we keep working it back, and pretty soon I say, could you only hit me with a stick, once a day? Right. And you say, no. Yeah. And we keep going, and eventually it gets to a point where I have to stop you, or I have to continue to be hit with a stick. That then gets to violence, right? So it sometimes gets to violence. But now if the first time you hit me with a stick, I pull out my gun and shoot you, you see, that's different. You see, so one has to use measured steps. One has to never apply violence unless it is the last resort. And it has to be not because you're angry, not because you're upset, not because you're annoyed, not because you don't like the person or any of it. All that's coming from ego, and it's all coming from fear. If it comes from ego and fear, it's the wrong reason. It's the wrong intent. If you're going to stop something from happening that should not happen, that's hurting others, then you can go as far as you have to go to do that. You don't just have to say, well, this guy wants to hit me with a stick, so, I'll be hit with a stick, every 10 minutes, for the rest of my life, and that's just mine to deal with. You don't have to be a pacifist. You can stop it. And if they're hitting your brother, your sister, your wife, your mother, your neighbor, or somebody else that's come to ask you for help, and you can help, then you should help.
But isn't
Okay,
that
and
in
it depends.
conflict with what
Yeah,
you
exactly,
said?
that's what's so
It
interesting
depends.
about this point.
You take whatever situation you're in and you make the best of it. You don't change.
Yeah, it
Because
depends.
I am philosophically a pacifist, although I might not, practically be a pacifist. So to me, if somebody is being violent and you're saying, listen, this is one little experience packet and you go around and around, and if really the result is death, then part of that acceptance is that is what happens. And
Yes.
because to me, violence and murder is never a resort. It's never an answer.
It depends on the situation, it depends on your intent, and it depends on their intent.
But isn't it fear that you're making it okay? You're afraid for your life, you're afraid to be hurt, you're afraid for your wife's
No.
life or whatever. Isn't that a fear that's
No.
making you say that it's acceptable?
No, not necessarily a fear. If you look at the bigger picture, okay, and you see in the bigger picture that this is a lesson, something that you can endure and grow from, okay, then you should probably let him hit you with a stick every day, because that's something that you're going to grow from. If you see that this is retarding, or that it's hurting someone else, that this is not a good lesson. There are lessons that you have an opportunity. So this way, there's an opportunity to grow. Now sometimes you have the ability to reach out and grab that, and sometimes you don't. You see? And we do that a lot with children. If you have a child and the child does something wrong, the child goes up and slaps another child and takes their toy. Okay, now you correct that child for doing that. Okay, if the child does it again, you continue to correct them. And if they go over and start it, you may use violence, if you will. You may intercede and stop the child, because they're going to go over there to smack that other kid and take their toy. So you stop them and you try to deal with it. You try to say, it's not nice, don't do that, it's not your toy, even if it is, it's not, you try to educate the child. But if they continue to go, well, then you have to physically intervene, because it is not appropriate to let this child go around and smack the other children and take their toys, because it traumatizes the other kids, being smacked and having their toy pulled away. And it happens all the time. And pretty soon you're going to create a lot of fear in them, and you can see that damage. So you kind of look at it from a big picture, and then you decide what it is you have to do that makes that big picture better.
Isn't that bully kid getting feedback? Because he's not going to have any friends. If you stop it, how's that feedback going to happen?
Well, you have to
could
balance.
be the
You have to balance that with what's happening to the other child.
Yeah.
The other child is being attacked and hit and whatever. They're having a problem too. Their world suddenly got to be very scary and dangerous, and it may affect them. You see.
But
So you look
removing
at.
the child is not violent. Whacking the child is violent. If you went
Yes.
over and said, I told you, whack, now that's violent. But just physically removing the child and saying, okay, I told you, now you're gonna have a timeout, no
Well-
toys, that's different.
No, that's violent in the sense that you are physically intervening. That's what I'm calling violence.
All right.
Physically intervening
That
is
helps to
violence.
define violence
Yeah.
then, because violence to us is like shooting someone.
Well, that depends on how far the physical intervention comes, you see. That's like I was talking with you. He's going to hit me with a stick. The first thing I do is tell him not to, ask him nicely. Then I may take the stick away from him, but then he may come back with another one, you see. And then I may take that stick away from him. And then I may spank him and send him to his room, and he'd come back with a pipe next time. And it may just go on and on and on. You may get to the point that your physical intervention finally, converges or evolves to a point where you have to do something more drastic. You see, that's what I'm saying. So in this case with the child, all you have to do is pick them up, take them someplace, distract them, get them interested in something else, and hope that they grow out of it, or, because maybe they're too young to really talk to or whatever. So you deal with it the way you can. And the violence, that's where I started out, has to only be appropriate to the situation. And it escalates. But there are those cases then where you get to a point where your physical intervention gets more and more physical and more violent, from just removing to something else.
Isn't that still a choice, though? I mean, at some point where you're becoming attached to the reality, so that if you're in that engagement, I mean, wouldn't a more evolved being, just let it be. If you want to kill me now,
See,
that's
that's
what you need
the
to
thing.
do.
Yeah, if it's just-
That's what you need to have, as opposed to me stopping you.
What
Wouldn't
about
you
an
just,
object
You have-
lesson?
surrender and say, okay?
Yeah.
So you have to do the.
That may be your solution. And you see, every incident is different. So when you get to that point, and if that's the solution, say it just affects you, and you have that, and
Say-
that's
say
your
it's me and you.
attitude,
So if it's me and you, and it's in that type of situation, but if you wanting to protect an other, you're trying to protect that other, but then if that being turns himself on you, then it's just you now, so now you
yeah,
have to make a choice.
now you have a choice.
Do
You
I
have a
kill this
choice.
person, or, okay, if that, you need to take me out,
Right.
then so be, I'm not
Right.
gonna engage in this violence.
Exactly. And if you make that choice is fine. Nothing wrong with that choice.
That's like turning the other cheek and just
Yeah.
going up on the cross kind of.
There's nothing wrong with that choice, but you may not want to make that choice. And how you make each choice has to do with your sense of what's going on in the bigger picture. Now, there's another thing to think about. You see, you have that person who just wants to take you out, right? And that's okay with you, but now if you let that person do that, and then that encourages them, and they realize that they can do that, then they're going to take him out too, because that was fun. And then it may take them, and then it may be your wife and children, and it may be other people, and pretty soon you've got a homicidal maniac on the way because they found out they could get away with it, you see. So you have to see a bigger picture. You have to be able to project into the future, and then you just make the best decision you can. And what is it that you should do that is best for everybody? Not just you, but best for everybody. And when you get to that decision, then that's the best decision you can make. Now, let's say it turns out you're wrong. Well, hey, you know, you made a decision, it was a bad one, you learn from it. Next time, you do it differently. Let's say you turn out you're right, you know, well then that's positive feedback. Oh, that was good, I'm glad I did that, you know, that would have been a good thing to do. So those are the choices you make, and it depends on how you make them. If you make it out of anger, that guy's gonna do this to me, well, I'll show him. That's not the right reason. But if you decide that it would be wrong for me to let this person then, to encourage that behavior and to pass it on. You know, it's not my responsibility. All right, you can do that to me and everybody else you want, and you're encouraging it. You're making it worse.
Not giving them the feedback they need.
Yeah, not giving them the feedback they need or whatever, then you can do something different. I'm just saying every case is different, and sometimes the thing to do is just turn the other cheek. That is the best thing to do, because doing anything else would, in the big picture, be worse. If you reach out and smack back, then you've just escalated the violence, you've created a problem that didn't have to exist. Just turn the other cheek. If it turns out that if you do that, you're going to make things worse, right? What you need to do is grab them by the throat and shake them, because then they'll stop slapping people, you see? Then you do that. It just depends, but you have to be, if you're in touch enough with the larger reality that you can make those decisions and make them well, then that's what you do. If you're not, you make them the best you can, and you'll learn from them. And you may learn, well, see, I should have just turned the other cheek, because all I did is took an affront to me and turned it into a big problem by being aggressive back. Well, then that was the wrong thing to do. So you have to look at the probable outcome, what's being affected, make your best decision, then you'll learn from it.
So it's just based on, that decision always has to come from a point of not you, it's gotta be pointing out.
Right.
You can never
Like
take
the
anything
whole.
personal, it always has to be based on
Exactly.
the whole. And
It
if
is
you make
never
a decision-
personal. It's never from you. It always has to be within the
And then you
concept.
make a decision that if it needs to be violent, you can rationally say, well, this is not, I have to stop this person.
Like this is a pathological agent for the whole that has to be neutralized. with
Yeah,
its
if
intentions.
you're in that position, but now that doesn't mean that you grab your machine gun and go out and try to get everybody you don't like,
No, right
because
on.
they're all pathological and need to be removed. That's not good either. And what you'll find out if you get into that mode, it's not you protecting the rest of the world from these awful people. It's your own fear. You're a vigilante. It's you being aggressive. It's you saying, you know, I know how the world should be and I'm going to make it that way. You see, that's just all ego. So it depends. See, it's not a matter of the act. It's a matter of how do you come to that act. Where do you come to it from? If you come to it from love and caring and from a bigger picture, then you just do the best you can with the decision you have to make. If you come to it from a me, oh, you know, I don't think they should be like that, you know. Yeah, let's go burn their computer and, you know, trash their office and do that because I don't like them being that way. That's all ego. That's about you and what you like and what you don't like. And that's the wrong place to come from. So it's, each case is a decision, and they all has to be made from love, from caring, and from a bigger picture, not just the little picture about you.
Like Heather was saying, is that with BP and the way they're just ravaging the planet, and things just seem to be just spiraling, you know? I mean, where do you go and say, you know what, it would be better if we just like nuke BP's offices so they can never destroy another ocean? You know, I mean, that's
basic,
basic
yeah,
analogy, but, I mean, that's better for the whole, you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
but basically that's probably wrong. You see? That's probably wrong to go in and do that. Then you are a vigilante, and if you're working from your intellect, here's another way to say it. If you are working from your intellect in that decision, if you're saying, oh, my intellect tells me that, you know, BP is an evil corporation and I should burn their building, then it's probably wrong. If you're working from a sense of being one in a larger picture and seeing where that's going and what's happening and the individuals and the rest of it, then you probably figure this is something for our society to deal with. This is like an illness, right? It's like somebody has an illness, and it's good for them to have that in the sense that they're going to learn from it, and the people around them are going to learn from it, and it's something they should deal with. Well, a lot of these things are things that we as a society need to deal with. It's part of our natural feedback when this is the way we are. We rape, pillage, and destroy for profit. You know, well, that gets to a point where people begin to say, this isn't right, you know, it doesn't feel good, rape, pillaging, you know, for profit. We need to put in, you know, we need to not do that. And people grow up.
That's what his generation is
Yeah.
saying, that we don't like this pillaging.
Right, we need to grow up. Now we get to the last part of his decision was, you know, what do we do about it? How do we interact with it? You know, do we go burn the office or what? And I'd say, no, you don't go burn somebody's office. What you do is you become the change that you want to see, right? Gandhi said that. So what happens, the way you can best fight that is you become love and caring. Because as you do, you will affect those around you, and they will affect those around them. Be that point of light, you know, that helps us move to the solution. So that's really the way that you should do this. You don't have to go out and take something else down or out that you think is negative. It's the wrong solution.
You are the world.
You try to put
Yes.
information out that people will come to a consensus that this is wrong and we want to change it.
Right. What happens is
That's
the
what
society,
the
this
church does.
thing, you know, these things like you're talking about BP and, you know, well, just in general, attitudes, you know, in the society, those are reflections of the way we are. You can't take it out. You see, it's endemic. It's us. It's the way we are. There's no way you can cut that out. You know,
We evolve out of it.
you have to evolve out of it. You have to outgrow it, because that's an expression of us. Now, if you got rid of BP, if we could maybe, and all BP just disappeared tomorrow, they didn't exist, nobody ever heard of them or remembered them, wouldn't make a bit of difference. There'd be another one and another one, because it's a reflection of us. You see, so that's of no value. That's violence in order to satisfy yourself that you're out there, you know, killing the enemy. That makes you about the same ilk as them. You see? They're out there raping the landscape, you know, because they think that's a good idea. You're out there raping them because you think that's a good idea, you know? So that's not the way. That's endemic. And if it's endemic, the only way to change it is to change our intents as a population, as a species. We need to grow up, and the best way to do that is to grow up yourself, because that sets an example for everybody else.